This morning I'm talking to you from in front of our church, and I'm cognizant of the fact that just to our left we have a church, an Anglo church that sponsors a Hispanic mission, and they also sponsor an Indian mission. To my right, just a couple of blocks, there's a Korean church, and I can see just across the street an African American congregation. This morning we're going to be talking about, with all of the churches that are already in existence, why would we plant new churches? What are some objections to starting new churches? Welcome back to session 3 of week 2 for our course in church planting. We're concluding our week of introduction to church planting. We talked about what is the church. If we're going to plant them, what are they? We talked yesterday about why we should start churches. Today we're going to talk about objections to church planting, or reasons people would give us when they say why we shouldn't plant churches. So what are some of the common objections to church planting? First, people will say that we have enough churches already. We don't need to plant any more churches. We already have plenty. Of course, in the last session, we discussed the need that does exist. We must continue to plant new churches. In America, 44% of Americans don't ever go to any church. Many people in America couldn't even go to a church if they wanted to because of language or other barriers. When I was serving as the director of missions in North Carolina, we approached a church about hosting a new congregation for Nepalis. The deacons met and discussed it, and they said, if those people want to come to church here, let them learn English and join our service. Obviously, that's not God's plan. We need to plant new churches. We don't have enough new churches already. As a matter of fact, among Southern Baptists, over 70% of the 42,000 churches are plateaued or declining, and every year 900 Southern Baptist churches close. That means we have to start almost 1,000 churches a year just to stand still. Forget about keeping up with population growth and new people coming into our country. Outside of America, remember that there are over 7,000 unreached people groups, and that doesn't even include all of the formerly reached people groups, like the French, only 1% of whom are involved in an evangelical church. So we actually do need to plant more churches. We don't have enough churches already. A second reason people might give is that people in the other churches will be offended. Church planting might just have a negative impact on existing churches. In his book, A Manual for Starting Churches, Leonard Waterman wrote, "To plant a church across the state, oh, that will be glory. But to start one in the town nearby, well, that's another story." People often see a new church plant as competition, as a threat. People are going to be afraid that the folks in other churches will be offended and that starting a new church is too divisive, or that the members will come out of my church. I had a church planter in Philadelphia with a congregation of about 25 people tell me that we did not need to plant another church in that city because his church was already there and they were going to reach the entire city. The problem with that thinking is twofold. First, as we've already seen, not everyone would go to the same church anyway. Language, culture, tradition, all of these factors keep us aware of the need to start different kinds of churches to reach different kinds of people. But a second concern is to see other churches as competition, when in reality we should be seeing them as partners in the harvest. And Jesus commanded us in Luke 10 to pray for more laborers, not to argue for fewer. We need more laborers in the harvest, working side by side as we bring the gospel to those who are living in darkness. A third objection is people would just say, well, church planting just doesn't work. It costs too much money, and we could save that money and put it in an existing church. We could be more effective. But remember, per capita, new church plants are 4 times more effective at reaching the lost than existing churches are. There is truth in the statement that some church plants fail. I can't deny that. Our friend Leonard Waterman that we just quoted puts that into perspective for us. He says, yes, there are new church failures just as there are established church failures, missionary failures, and failures in the pastorate. We are not about to scrap our missionary program because a missionary had a nervous breakdown or experiences some other sort of failure. When we see a new church failure, we want to see what we can learn from it so that we can actually benefit from this failure rather than be discouraged by it. Related to that idea is people who would say, fourthly, we want to grow our own church. So let's strengthen our church and other existing churches first, and then we can reach more people from a position of strength. That may sound good, but lost people can't wait for us to get our act together. Churches grow fastest during the first 5 years, and starting new churches breathes life into the existing works. But if we stop and wait until all of our churches mature and become healthy and are desiring to reach out into the community, we're just going to see an entire generation of ineffective disciples die off without planting new churches. So it's a double loss. We cannot wait for our church to grow before we begin to obey God. As a matter of fact, I believe it's a spiritual principle that it's through obedience to Christ that we are going to grow a healthier church where we are. It's when we go out and share the gospel, we go out and make disciples, we go out and plant new churches, that our church of origin becomes stronger and more effective for gospel ministry. The final objection people might give to church planting is they just admit, we don't know how to start a church. There's good news if that's a concern that you have. Today, more than any other time in history, there are resources to help churches plant new churches. Denominational agencies, non-denominational networks, church planting experts are falling out of the trees. Training, mentoring, help is available. Anyone who wants to plant a church can find a church planting network that will walk alongside of them and help them. NAM, as we've talked about, helping plant churches throughout America for Southern Baptists. The No Place Left Network is another great organization. There are many organizations out there that you can partner with. So find somebody to help you and get out there and plant a church, and you'll be amazed at the good that it will do for your existing congregation. But there's another way that objections to church planting appear. What happens when the objection to church planting comes from the church planter? What I want you to do, this video is just about to end, and then I have a link for another video for you to see. It's the testimony of Mike and Tanya Hauser talking about how their own objections to starting a church had to be overcome in the work that God called them to do in Toronto. After you watch that video and you read through the textbook assignment for today, I want you to get onto the forum. There's a question there. What objections have you heard against church planting? And based on all of the things that we've talked about this week and the things that you've read in the text, how would you answer that? Be sure to read the questions, the objections that other students have placed on the forum, and come back and relate to their comments as well. Maybe you'll have an insight that will help them answer a question, or maybe you'll gain an insight from one of their answers. So don't just pop in and drop your information, but come back and check a couple of times during the week and see what other answers you can learn from your fellow students. Our association consists of 3 counties made up of 1.5 million people. Out of those, 1 million people do not know the Lord Jesus Christ. So even though there are all those churches around us, we still need more churches started. We still need more people to hear about Jesus. We still need to make disciples and send them to the nations. And that's why we still plant churches.